My name is Magnolia Whitmore, and on the day I turned 18, my mother let the coffee boil over and didn't move to turn off the stove. She stood there motionless, hands trembling at her sides as if the sound of the liquid bubbling was an old song she knew too well. I watched her in silence, seated at the kitchen table, with sunlight filtering through floral curtains, casting delicate shadows over the scratched wooden surface. She didn't wish me a happy birthday. She just looked at me as if it were the last time she'd ever see me. In that moment, I knew something was wrong, not with the day, but with me, with my very existence. Growing up, I'd heard odd tales about the Raventon forest, a sleepy little town frozen in time in northern Vermont. They said it shifted shape at night, that sometimes voices whispered names among the trees, names no one should recognize. But I did, because since I was 6 years old, I'd heard mine being called, always in the same tone, always at the same hour, 3 a.m. My parents pretended not to hear it. When I asked, they said it was just a child's imagination. But as the years passed, they started avoiding me in the early hours, as if they were afraid to find me standing in the hallway, eyes glazed, listening to something they pretended didn't exist. Then on my birthday, amid the smoke of burnt coffee and the strange silence filling the house, I found a thick envelope, unstamped, resting on the doorstep. It was cold, as if left by someone who didn't belong to this world. Inside, there was a single sheet, no signature, no explanation, just one sentence written in ink so dark it looked like dried blood. The promise must be fulfilled. My stomach churned, not just because of the message, but because something inside me reacted to it with familiarity. As if I already knew, as if I'd lived it before, as if that sentence had been written in my name long before I was born. My mother didn't look at me when I asked about the letter. She only said in a low, broken voice, "They came for me, and now it's your turn." I didn't understand everything in that moment, but one thing was clear. My family's story didn't begin with me. And if I wanted to survive what was coming, I'd need to find out what had been promised. And to whom? That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, the letter still in my hands, the thick paper scraping my fingers like it held invisible thorns. The sentence echoed in my mind, growing louder until it was impossible to ignore the weight it carried. The promise must be fulfilled. Promise. The word gnawed at me. It felt more like a sentence than an agreement. And deep down, something told me this wasn't just about me. It was about every woman in my lineage. I remembered the stories whispered by my grandmother, always with a distant look and a hand clutching her rosary, as if faith could shield her from the shadows. She said the Whitmores owed a debt to those who live beyond the mist. When I was little, I thought it was a poetic way of talking about the dead. Now I wasn't so sure. The next day, I went up to the attic, a place my mother always kept locked, claiming it was full of moss and rotting wood. I found the key hidden in the back of a drawer in the china cabinet, alongside a folded scrap of paper. On it, just my name in firm handwriting, Magnolia. No instructions, no warning, as if they expected me to know what to do. And I did. I opened the attic door like someone breaking into an ancient tomb. The smell was dust and old paint, but there was something else. A cold that didn't come from winter, but from far away. A cold that seemed to breathe. I rummaged through trunks, suitcases, and stacked boxes until I found a dark leather journal, the initials LW etched into the cover. Laura Whitmore, my great-grandmother's name. The woman who, according to family lore, had vanished into the forest during a storm years before I was born. The journal's first pages were chaotic, scribbled in haste, as if Laura were running from herself as she wrote. But there was a pattern, a thin line between delirium and truth. She spoke of a figure, named Ashmore, the Lord of Shadows, and a pact sealed with blood and magic. She said that to keep Raventon at peace, someone from the Whitmore line had to enter the forest and present themselves to him on their 18th birthday. That he couldn't leave, but he couldn't be ignored either. It was an ancient balance, upheld for generations, and any break would bring unpredictable consequences. Laura was the last one promised, but she didn't come back. And now, it was my turn. I closed the journal with icy fingers, as if the chill of the past had touched me directly. There was no room left for doubt. My life had been scripted long before I took my first breath. And for the first time, I felt the ground of reality give way beneath me. I wasn't just an 18-year-old girl in a forgotten town. I was the heir to an ancestral pact, and someone was waiting for me, someone who'd been calling me all along. The next afternoon, Raventon seemed quieter than usual, as if the town itself were holding its breath. Every step I took on the sidewalk creaked like a confession. Neighbors watched me from behind their curtains, as if they knew. Maybe they did. I'd always found it odd how people treated me differently as I grew up. Overly kind gestures, smiles that lingered a second too long, looks heavy with pity. Now it all made sense. I was the next one. And everyone knew it, except me. I got home before dusk and found my mother sitting on the couch, staring into space, clutching a teacup with both hands. Beside me, Laura's journal seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I sat across from her and, for the first time, demanded the truth with a steady voice. She took a long time to answer, but when she spoke, her voice sounded like every word reopened a wound that never healed. She said the promise was made over 200 years ago by one of Raventon's founders, Abigail Whitmore. A dark spirit threatened to consume the town, spreading madness and death. To stop it, Abigail went into the forest alone and returned with a deal. No one knows how she survived or what she truly saw there, but the agreement was clear. Every generation, a woman from the Whitmore line would be sent to him, a blood bond, a silent sacrifice, not to die, but to belong. And what happened to Laura? I asked. She tried to run, my mother replied, but the call is stronger than will, and no one escapes Ashmore. The mention of his name made my skin crawl. Ashmore, the name I'd heard in dreams, the presence in the woods, the owner of the promise. That night the dreams returned, more vivid. I walked among the trees, branches bending toward me as if they recognized me. The darkness wasn't empty, it watched me. And at the center of it all, him. Tall, cloaked in rippling shadows, eyes like liquid silver, and a voice that echoed without sound. You're already mine, Magnolia. I woke before dawn, drenched in cold sweat. Laura's journal lay open beside me on a page I didn't remember, turning to a hand-drawn map with specific markings in the forest and a scrawled note, walk alone, never look back. He hates regret. The next morning, I packed my backpack in silence. I didn't say goodbye to my mother. She watched me cross the threshold with teary eyes but said nothing. She knew that one way or another I'd leave. I walked to the edge of town, where the pavement gives way to a dirt trail leading into the forest. The air there was different, thicker, older, and when I took my first step among the trees, I felt like I was crossing an invisible boundary, not just between Raventon and the unknown, but between who I was and who I was about to become. The first step into the forest was almost imperceptible. There was no grand sign, no sudden shift in light or sound, but something changed. I felt it, as if the world behind me had been silenced, and what lay ahead was more real than anything I'd ever known. The air was colder, but not biting, a cold that crept along my skin like a curious presence. The trees here were different from those outside, too tall, too ancient. There was no path, but my feet knew where to go. Every root, every branch seemed to shift subtly to clear my way. As if the forest recognized me, I walked for hours, maybe longer. Time didn't make sense there. The sky, when visible, was always cloaked in thick clouds that never seemed to move. I didn't feel hungry or thirsty, but I felt something watching me, a subtle awareness, as if the tree trunks themselves stared in silence. Twice, I thought, I heard my name whispered on the wind, a low, masculine voice that seemed to come from within me, not outside. After a long while, I saw something ahead. A dark structure with straight, elegant lines covered in cold black ivy. My whole body froze, not from fear. It was something else. Recognition. The house, if it even was a house, felt as out of place as an old memory forced into a dream. I knew I had to go inside. There were no doors, just a tall opening like an arch of carved stone. I crossed it without thinking. Inside, the light seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. A faint, grayish glow, not bright enough to reveal details, but enough to keep me from stumbling. The air smelled of damp earth and night-blooming flowers, though no plants were in sight. It was like being inside an ancient thought, muffled, dense, alive. And then he appeared, not like in my dreams, not right away. First came the warmth, a warmth that wasn't physical, but pierced through my spine. Then a shadow stretching across the walls with no visible light source. Finally a figure, tall, lean, wrapped in something that was neither fabric nor smoke, but both. His face hidden except for his eyes, living silver, fixed on me, watching as if they already knew everything. As if they'd been waiting not for me, but for confirmation that I truly existed. Magnolia, he said, not as a question, as a memory. My mouth went dry. I wanted to speak, but there were no words. Part of me screamed to run. Another part, deeper, quieter, said I'd come too far to turn back. And in the back of my mind, a familiar voice whispered in my chest, "You weren't brought here. You've always belonged." And then he smiled, not with his lips, but with the air around him, with the way the darkness seemed to pull back, as if the world breathed around him. And in that instant, something in me gave way, not from weakness, from understanding. I didn't know him, but he knew every piece of me. I stood there, frozen before him, trying to figure out if this moment was real or just an extension of my dreams. But it wasn't a dream, it was too real. The floor beneath my feet had texture, the air had weight, and his eyes cut through me with a clarity that left me defenseless. I'd never been looked at like that, not as a girl, not as a promise, but as something inevitable. He didn't move, neither did I. It was as if we were locked in a silent agreement. Whoever spoke first would lose. But I'd already lost. The moment I stepped into that forest, something in me had been claimed. I felt it in every part of my body. A tension. That wasn't fear, but memory. As if my blood carried something ancient that was only now waking up. Something that remembered him. He broke the silence. "You came sooner than I expected," he said, his voice resonating inside my ribcage. Deep, steady, but not harsh. It was the voice of someone who didn't ask, he stated. I took a step forward without consciously deciding to. I felt the wooden floor creak beneath my feet, and for the first time, noticed I was barefoot. When had I taken off my shoes? "You called me," I replied, and as soon as I said it, I knew it was true. As much as I wanted to pretend I'd come by choice, that I was here out of courage, deep down, I knew I'd been led. Gently, steadily, an invisible thread pulling me through the years. Every dream, every feeling of being watched, none of it was chance. He tilted his head slightly as if studying a painting. And then, for the first time, I saw the hint of a smile. No irony, no threat, just recognition. "You heard," he said, "even when you were little." I didn't deny it. And in that moment I realized what unsettled me most about him. He didn't speak like a stranger. He spoke like someone who'd known me for a long time. And the more I listened, the more his words made sense in me, like they were part of a forgotten language my body still recalled. In the days that followed, if they were even days, he watched me more than he spoke. I explored that windowless house, each hallway seeming to lead to another time. No clock marked the hours, no door locked. But everything there had purpose. I could feel the forest outside pulsing like a living thing. It didn't surround us. It sustained us. It was the edge of the world I had left. I started writing, at first to keep from going mad, then because the words just came. They weren't mine. They were memories I'd never lived, names I'd never heard yet suddenly recognized. I began dreaming of women, always different but with the same eyes, always walking into the darkness, never returning. But in my dreams, I came back, and there was always a hand waiting for me on the other side. I didn't know what he was. Not yet. But every time I looked into Ashmore's eyes, something in me quieted the fear, not from a lack of danger, but from the presence of fate. It was as if my entire life had been a prologue. And now, finally, the story was beginning. I can't say how much time passed since I entered Ashmore's house. The light there never changed. The sky, when glimpsed through gaps in the trees, stayed the same deep gray, as if time had stopped just to watch us. I stopped counting the days, maybe because counting implied a return, and I already knew there was no going back. The forest doesn't allow it. It devours time like it devours memories. And the longer I stayed, the more the world outside felt. Distant, small, irrelevant. Ashmore wasn't constant. Sometimes he'd vanish for hours, or what I thought were hours. The house grew quiet, but never empty. His presence lingered in every wall, every shadow. Other times he'd appear out of nowhere, behind me, beside me, as if space bent to accommodate him. He didn't ask questions, he didn't demand anything. But each time we met, I felt a part of me say goodbye to who I'd been. And I let it go. Because the truth was, I didn't feel lost. I felt whole. As if everything around me, Laura's, words, my mother's tears, my childhood dreams, had prepared me to be right here, beside him. One night, I woke with a start. The house seemed to pulse, the wood alive, warm, restless. The forest, too, restless, whispering as if the branches spoke to one another. Something was different. I left the room and found Ashmore waiting in the hallway. He didn't smile, but he didn't need to. There was something in his eyes, not fear, not anger, urgency. He extended his hand. I took it. Not because I trusted him, but because in that moment there was something greater than trust, recognition. We went to the heart of the forest, a place I didn't yet know, though it felt like it had always been waiting for me. The ground was covered in interwoven roots, like fingers clutching something too precious to leave exposed. In the center, a mark on the earth, an ancient circle carved with symbols I'd seen. In Laura's journal. This was it, the origin of everything, the place where the pact was made, and where, now something was trying to break it. Ashmore didn't speak. He just looked at me, and I understood, not with words, but with a deep pain that pierced my chest like an icy blade. The pact was unraveling, Something or someone was forcing the balance to crumble. And when it did, Raventon wouldn't be the only one to pay the price. There were cracks in the forest, in time, in the very veil separating what's human from what isn't. And in that living clearing, he finally spoke, his voice lower than ever. "You feel it, don't you? What's awakening?" I did. Not in thought, but in flesh. I felt something ancient, held back for generations, stirring, something that recognized me as a link, something that had been waiting for me since long before my first breath. Back at the house that night, Ashmore approached me like never before, not as a shadow, but as a man. And for a moment I saw his face fully, young, ancient, tragic, like someone who'd loved too much and lost beyond what time could heal. "You're different from them," he whispered. "You weren't sent. You were made for this." And in that moment I knew nothing would be the same. Not for me, not for him. The pact was no longer a debt. It was a transition, and I had already crossed over. That early morning I didn't sleep. I sat by the open window, watching the forest breathe. The mist danced among the trunks as if alive, as if it knew each tree by name. And maybe it did. Nothing in that forest was lifeless. Everything seemed to watch, remember, feel. I felt part of it now. Not as a guest, but as an extension. As if my veins were slowly rooting into that silent soil. Ashmore didn't appear. For the first time in days, or weeks, or whatever it was, he was completely absent. And his absence was a void that weighed on me like thickened air. I was overcome by a strange exhaustion, not physical, but spiritual. The weariness of someone who'd seen enough to know there's no turning back. And it was true. I didn't want to go back. Not because Raventon wasn't home, but because the girl who'd left there no longer existed as the sun or something. Like it, threatened to rise. Something shifted in the house's floor. It was as if everything vibrated in a slow, deep, dark rhythm. A pulse from beneath the earth, as if the pact's very heart were about to burst. I ran to the forest, as if something in me already knew the way, and it did. My feet led me to the clearing, now bathed in a pale, sickly light. The roots were exposed, torn from the soil, bleeding dark sap. In the center, the sacred circle had been broken. Someone or something had defiled it. That's where I saw him, Ashmore, kneeling, hands buried in the earth, as if trying to hold back a force tearing him apart from within. His eyes, once calm, silver, impenetrable, now burned with a glow that didn't belong to this world. When he lifted his face and saw me, he didn't speak, but the pain in his eyes said more than 1,000 words. He was breaking. And with him, everything that kept him contained. The truth hit me with the weight of centuries. He wasn't the monster of the legend. He was the wall between two worlds, a guardian, a prisoner. And the pact didn't favor him. It bound him, kept him in check, so whatever lived in the forest depths couldn't cross the boundary. But now the wall was cracking, and if I didn't act, Raventon would just be the beginning. I knelt beside him, placed my hands over his, ignoring the heat that burned like molten iron. I didn't ask permission. I just closed my eyes and let myself feel everything, the pain, the fear, the desperation, and beneath it all, guilt. A guilt as old as the pact itself. Because Ashmore hadn't chosen this. He'd been given up, just like me. That's when I understood. The pact could be remade, but not with blood, not with submission, with presence, with awareness. I was heir to a lineage that had sworn to protect, but over centuries had only known sacrifice. I could break the cycle, not by running, by staying. So I spoke. Few words, but with everything I had. I'll stay. The forest darkened, then glowed. The roots wove back together, sealing the circle. The pain in Ashmore's eyes gave way to something I'd never seen in him. Peace. Not the peace of resignation, the peace of finding an echo. When I stood, the air around me had changed. The ground no longer pulsed with violence. It pulsed with acceptance. I knew I'd never return to Raventon. I didn't need to. The town, my childhood, home, the faces I knew, they belonged to an old version of me. The Magnolia who'd crossed into the forest was someone else. And the one who stayed there, beside Ashmore, was more whole than I'd ever been. And when our eyes met for the last time that day, without promises, without words, I knew something new had begun. Not the end of a story, but the birth of a legend. And this time, I wasn't just a character in it, I was its author. They say no one returns from the Raventon forest, that whoever enters disappears without a trace, swallowed by the trees, or dragged off by voices that don't belong to this world. And maybe that's true, because the girl who crossed that boundary, the Magnolia who carried doubts, fear, homesickness, she never came back. What stayed in her place was something else. Someone who finally understood her own name, her own blood, what it means to be made of promises and choices. I'm not writing this expecting anyone to find it. The forest doesn't give back. It transforms, and what happens here doesn't follow the rules of time or logic. But still, I leave these words. Because if one day another girl wakes up with dreams she can't explain, with a strange feeling that someone's calling her name in the dark, maybe she'll need to know she's not alone, that there's an invisible thread tying us all together. Ashmore still walks among the trees, sometimes as shadow, sometimes as man. He's not mine, nor am I his. We're part of something bigger, older than any tale whispered on Raventon's porches. We're what remains when fear gives way to acceptance, when the promise stops being a prison and becomes a choice. I don't belong to the world I came from, and finally I understand I never did. My home is here, among deep roots and silences heavy with meaning, between the past that shaped me and the present I chose to inhabit. If you're reading this, maybe you're about to cross the same boundary. And if you are, know this: the forest sees you, feels you, and if you hear your name on the wind, answer. But only if you're ready to never be the same again.